show you how to do that now. I'm just going to get rid of these extra green boxes because we don't need those anymore, and I'm going to change that to a more reasonable height of 200 pixels. Okay, so we're back to something similar to what we had at the beginning of the last video. So what happens if I want to move the purple div, say a little to the right and a little down, and I want everything beneath that to flow accordingly, so to move down with it? Well, how you do that is you add a margin to that item. So let me show you how this works. I've just got rid of the position static because we don't need it. As we saw at the end of the last video, position static is the default, so we don't need to have that there. So if I state I want to have a margin of, let's say, 10 pixels, what does that do? Okay, so it moves it slightly to the right. Let's get a slightly bigger margin, make it clearer. What we've done there is we've created a whole margin around the div. So that means that anything below the div is going to get shifted down by that margin, and the div itself is going to get shifted to the right because of this margin here. The div itself is shifted down because there's a margin there, and if we did have anything to the right of this div, then that would be shifted to the right as well. So we've created a whole margin around the edge of that div. Alright, okay, simple enough. Now, what if we wanted to move it a different amount right and down? Let's see how we do that. We can actually specify the margin of the div to be different on the top, bottom, left, and right. And the way we do this is we put several different instructions in, or measurements in. So let's say 50 pixels, let's say 100 pixels, let's say 30 pixels, and let's say 10 pixels. Now, the important thing to remember is that these are being assigned to the margins of the div in a specific order. So this 50 pixels margin is now going to be the top margin. So the top margin for this div is going to be 50 pixels. And the others go round in a clockwise order. So 50 pixels at the top. The right margin will now be 100 pixels. The bottom margin will be 30, and the left margin will be 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Oops, I don't think I saved it. Let's try it again. Okay, there we go. So that shifted things around a little bit. Notice this big margin doesn't actually make any difference because there's nothing to the right of this div. We're not floating anything. So it's an invisible margin as far as we can see. But this margin at the bottom is now 30 pixels. If we want to make that really clear, we could change it to 230 pixels. Save that and refresh, and you can see that that's moved that down. So we've now got a really large margin at the bottom, and the 10 pixel margin at the left is quite small. Again, we can increase that if we want and move it. That effectively moves it to the right by giving it a large margin on the left. So that's how you make a margin which is different for the top, right, bottom, and left of the div. There's one other thing that's worth knowing, is a different way of doing it. You can actually assign the different margins differently. So it might be that you want to add a margin to an item, a div or a paragraph, but you don't actually know, in some cases, what the existing margins are, or you don't want to set them again. So you only want to set, say, the left margin. Now the way you do that is you use the instruction margin-left, and then you can set that margin to, let's say, 400 pixels. And that now resets everything else, so we don't have any margins, or we haven't set any margins at least, on the bottom and the right and the top, but we've set the left margin to 400 pixels. And similarly, you can do that with margin top, margin right, and margin bottom. So you can set each of the margins separately if you want to only set one of them and leave the rest alone.